Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Basil Siokas. I'm a programming associate with the festival. I'll be moderating the Q&A. It gives me great pleasure to welcome up the director of Crime and Punishment, Stephen Maing. Welcome. And Stephen has many people to acknowledge.
Yeah, can we just give it up for all the people who are here in the
So, this is probably the most people I've ever seen on stage here in Egyptian. But thank you all so very much for joining us here. Stephen, I'm going to start with just a couple of quick questions, and I know that the audience will surely have lots of questions for you. Let me just start with the basic question is, how did you come to this story?
Sure. Ross Tuttle and I had been working on a series of films. We did 3 films before this film, actually, about stop and frisk, about police communications, and it featured some anonymous officers that wound up wanting to go more public when they saw that they were recruited. And so we asked them if they wanted to participate in this in a very taste-style, very character-driven piece, and they were more than eager, and that's what happened here.
If we could have anybody, I don't want to direct it all to you, but if anybody wants to speak about why it was so important for you to participate in this project in particular, please feel free.
Jessica did that first.
Good evening, everyone. As you saw in the movie, I'm not a very good speaker. I get sentimental. But when Steve and Manuel Gomez approached me and asked me if they could recall part of the problem I was going through with my son, I explained to him that at the moment, I didn't want to be part of a film or nothing, but that if it would help other kids like my son, and if it would help for the injustice in New York City to stop, that I wouldn't think it twice. I did tell them, run it by my son Pedro Hernandez, and if he was okay, then I'm 100% in back of him, backing him up in any decision he will make. After I saw Steve work, it was so touching because he would be the first one in the courtroom, waiting for my son's case to be called. The perseverance he had, it was like he was part of my family for a whole year. And those things don't have no words to explain. So once again, I want to thank Steve, Manuel Gomez for introducing me to Steve and giving us the chance to be a part in such a special film. Thank you.
Since the film was announced for being at Sundance, has there been any kind of official response from the NYPD, or even an unofficial response in terms of having this story in this kind of public platform?
Exactly. There hasn't been yet.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of the risks involved with the hidden camera footage, the sort of hidden recordings? Any legal risks, any sort of fears about retribution because of that?
All right, well, what happens when you record NYPD? They're a machine, and anything you do, they'll write a law to stop you from doing it. We're not allowed to record anymore. It's actually part of the patrol guide. As you can see, when Sandy was recording, one thing they did to him is they publicly, in front of his peers, embarrassed him to the point where he had a small heart attack. And that's one of the reasons he couldn't be here. But there's many, many, many layers of how they use retribution and retaliation to stop us, to stop us from letting you know the truth. And they make us look bad. But that's hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. And can I ask one more, and then I want to open it up to the audience. For the filmmakers, has there been any fear or retribution on your part in terms of when you were putting this together? Have you had any kind of issues with the cops from doing this?
We worked for years with a few of these guys before we've embarked on this particular project, and it was a very careful process of taking their temperature and making sure that they were comfortable every step of the way.
I guess you would always think that there's a little bit of concern. I mean, we feel like we sided with the police. We're not against the police, right? We're on their side, and we're telling your story.
Let me say something about that, though. When you go up against a powerful institution, no matter where it is in this country, there's a risk for everybody involved, and everybody on the stage took a risk and is still taking a risk. But inherently, you have to go with it's the right thing to do. And I think everybody standing here believes that when you are telling the truth, it's always the right thing to do.
So I would like to open it to the audience. So yes, I saw you first, right here.
I'm guessing this is a national problem. Has your story brought this out to the rest of the country?
Let me just quickly repeat. I know this was obviously a New York story, but this is probably a national problem. Have you, talk a little bit about that aspect of it?
Thank you for your question. It's great that you acknowledge that it's a national issue, because some people think it's actually local. About a little over 20 years ago, between broken windows policing and Comstat, this quota situation started, and it did spread throughout the nation, because in the documentary, the former commissioner mentions a few of his closest allies. They actually went to be police chiefs in other cities, and they brought the system there, the cancer. So this is a national issue.
Please.
It's not only national, it's international. When I came about stop and frisk a little while ago, I got a call from a guy from the United Kingdom. He found my number. Far from here, they mock the police department. They think they're the best system that ever happened. The guy called me because shortly enough, they were using Comstat over there. And he exposed the corruption, and he got fired. It's not national, it's not local, it might be global. But you have the opportunity to help us. It takes a village to raise a child. We cannot do it by ourselves. We need you.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, right here, please.
Pedro, were you considered for a pretrial services release by New York City's Criminal Justice Services Agency? The spending of 8 months in jail and then requiring a private bail fund to get you out. This is what feeds the criminal justice system, because so many people in your position will enter a plea to anything just to get out. And Criminal Justice Services Agency, the Pretrial Services Agency in New York City, has the responsibility of considering individuals like yourself for release and not having to wait for a private bail fund 8 months later to post that bail.
I can answer that for you if you want to. No, they were not. He was not considered for that. That doesn't really happen. I mean, that's just not the way it goes. Not for those kids, not in the Bronx.
Let him speak.
It was actually 12 months I was in there, going on 13, but we put in an appeal for the bail application in downtown Manhattan, and it was like, everything we did was denied, so it was like, so certain people stepped up in the picture, that's when they approved of everything. And that's when they lowered my bail to $100,000. The RFK Human Rights Organization, they posted my bail and they bailed me out.
And just to put that into perspective too, we have 33 other clients signed up against the same detective that falsified his arrest. That word, the word of the cop, is taken by the judge as gospel a lot of the times. We're trying to get that change.
And I just want to say one thing on that point. We're all besieged by this injustice. In the past 2 weeks, I have gotten now 13 more attempted murder cases, just like this, from Kalamazoo, Michigan, Fayetteville, North Carolina, Fort Lee, New Jersey, Hartford, Connecticut, and the rest in New York. And no matter how much evidence I present, like I did in this case, and how many times I show, the DAs don't want to see it. Like, you know, we need to help, and I hope that you all support this issue with this film and shows that what we're suffering.
One of the other pieces that's really key in New York State up until this year, actually last year, 16 and 17-year-olds were automatically prosecuted as adults for any crime that they committed. So if someone's 16 years old, they're arrested, they're going immediately to Rikers Island. And oftentimes, folks probably saw the docuseries about Khalif Browder, another young person who was on Rikers Island for 3 years, ended up committing suicide when he returned to the Bronx. This is something you see throughout the system, so officers are actually going after younger folks because they're more likely to cop a plea. And in Illinois, you've seen a lot of this, they actually call it the Hall of Fame of wrongful convictions for teenagers, because that many teenagers are actually copying pleas as a result of being targeted by police officers. And it's a national epidemic. This case kind of highlights, and a lot of folks say, there's thousands of Pedros. There's thousands of Khalifs just in New York City. So when you look around the country, there's probably tens of thousands.
We have time for one more question. In the very back there, please. Yep.
I was just wondering, when you're talking about the money here, because clearly it all comes down to money, it seems like, that what do they make to keep you in jail, or where's the money coming from? What's the incentive?
So if you can talk about the role money plays within this.
All right, so there's a census every 10 years, a federal census. There's also a state census. So 80% of the arrest in upstate New York, 80% of the convicted felons in upstate come from the 5 boroughs in New York City. And when you're upstate, you're counted as a resident of that county. So when it's time to distribute census dollars, upstate gets the dollars, but Harlem, Brooklyn, Bronx, the communities where the inmates are from are missing those dollars. So it comes from the federal government and goes right upstate. And I don't think I need to tell you the demographic of the towns upstate.
So the money is a powerful aspect. In the city, when the unions decided to protest against some of these things, the union leadership said, watch how we shut down the city, because they control everything. So when they shut down, the impact was the overtime for the police department. No summonses were issued. Zero currency. The court system ended up getting backed up. The jury system, it generates its own money. The system perpetuates itself, and this is what they're doing. So there's a lot of money in this process of locking people up and generating summonses. This film kind of identifies and sets the tone for other law enforcement officers all over the country who are on the right side and say they want to make a difference. This film gives them something to look at and say they too can stand up, and there are people and organizations like that are presented here that say this is the right thing to do and we can do this all over the United States. It's something that's necessary and needed. Your support for this film, for these gentlemen who made this film, is absolutely necessary in order to get this message out.
So one thing that is very important about the money part, and I know everybody heard about the famous drug on war and how the federal government paramilitarized, I don't know if that's the word, they make the police a paramilitary organization. Meaning, they gave them all the weapons, they gave them all the money. cities around the country get money for every drug-related arrest they make from the federal government. The more drug-related arrests they make, the more money they're gonna get from the federal government. So that's how so many kids are getting arrested for a bag of weed that they had in their shoes, but it was visible by the cop.
Yeah, it's for
Right? And if you go up the chain, I'm sorry, the jail system, that's a whole nother different. Who's building the jail? If you have no bodies, then the contractor who getting the contract to build the jails are going out of business. What kind of business are being run inside the jail for 50 cents an hour? They selling clothing, they are raising fish, they are selling this thing for cheap labor, or making a ton of money and paying the inmate 50 cents an hour.
We do have to wrap up, but I want to ask a really important question, which is what can this audience do? What groups should they support? What should they do to help get this issue out there?
These guys, everyone here has toiled and suffered and put everything on the line for years. And what we're trying to do with this film is help start a conversation. So if this had any impact on you and you leave this theater, talk about it. Go to social media, we have a hashtag, Crime and Punishment Doc, NYPD12, hashtag Edward Raymond, hashtag Pedro Hernandez, and please talk about it and spread the word and tell people to look into this. If you don't want to watch film, look into the stories, and that would be incredibly helpful.
Whether or not we're successful depends on your support. So we want to start the ripple effect from right here in the Egyptian. If you guys can join us for a photo, to send that symbol, to send that message out there that we have support.
We're gonna do the photo right outside the rest of the theater. It's gonna be a big group thing. We already have a photographer set up. If you all could come, that'd be great. Really appreciate it.
Please stand for this.